So for the past several weeks, months, we've seen quite a bit of saber rattling from the United States against Venezuela. There have been threats made against the country itself and its government, especially President Maduro. President Donald Trump has had a call with President Maduro and essentially asked him to capitulate to U.S. demands. Now, ostensibly, the issue that we're seeing here is that this is a drugs-related issue, that there are drugs that are emanating or that are flowing either through Venezuela or originating from Venezuela and then by road or by ship going to the United States. And we've seen a number of attacks on vessels by U.S. forces on vessels which have been alleged to be transporting drugs. We've also seen a bit of controversy here quite a bit of controversy where Pete Hegseth, U.S. Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War, if you're to take his word for it, we see that he authorized double tap strikes, which is basically, hitting a target, and then when there were survivors, when it had no potential of being able to carry drugs anymore, they killed the survivors. And this became, somewhat problematic, as one would imagine. Now what's happened is that we woke up today to Donald Trump tweeting that he has launched large-scale attacks in Venezuela and that he has captured the president and his wife, and they have been flown out of the country. Now, this is a major escalation, right? Targeting ships outside of the territorial waters of a country and then taking strikes within a country are two very different things. And so we wake up this morning and we see a tweet from President Donald Trump where he said that the US has launched large-scale strikes on Venezuela, and has also captured President Maduro and his wife, and that they've been flown out of Venezuela. And we got some further information from Pam Bondi, which is the Attorney General, that charges will be laid against President Maduro, and that he's headed to New York, where he will stand trial for offenses relating to arms and narcotics and things like that. Now, we also have to realize that prior to this, there was a bounty, a reward on President Maduro's head, about $50 million from the US government. And that was also something that was quite interesting, that a sitting president had a reward this much. Now, ostensibly, this is about drugs and the flow of drugs into the United States. But I think there's a lot more geopolitics, obviously, involved here. One particular issue is Venezuela's oil wealth and other natural resources that the United States may want access to, and certainly Donald Trump may want access to. And that a friendlier Venezuelan government would be able to do this. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. One is the international opposition. Can, for example, the US extend its own sovereignty, if you will, against another state? Right? If they had a reward, or if they wanted to capture the president of another country, can it go ahead and launch this operation to bring him in? The short answer, and in fact the long answer, is absolutely not. Right? There is simply no space or provision or exception in international law that would allow such a thing. And this is common sense. You don't need somebody with a background in international law to tell you this. What we're seeing right now is a violation of one of the most fundamental tenets of international law, which is enshrined in Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, which is this prohibition on the threat or use of force against the political independence or territorial integrity of another state, basically protecting the sovereignty of all states. Right, and preventing really the interference in the internal affairs of another country. And what we've seen here is exactly that the United States, using this urge to prosecute a sitting president, has gone ahead and taken this step, which really is a violation of Article 2.4. There really is no justification for this violation of Article 2.4. And the only exceptions, and this has been discussed elsewhere as well, the only exceptions is really if the UN Security Council authorizes you to use force against another state. That has not taken place. Or if there is an element of self-defense, that another state conducted an armed attack, and that has a certain threshold. That has certainly not been met. Even if you could prove categorically that there were drugs emanating from Venezuela and that the state was supporting that, there was attribution that you could make to the state of Venezuela, you can't go in and attack another state, and you certainly cannot go in and kidnap its president. The other element here is immunity. There is this concept of sovereign immunity. There's this concept of this immunity that presidents and heads of state have of other countries. And usually the courts of any jurisdiction will abide by this and refuse to prosecute or go ahead with a case when such a thing arises. Now we have to see whether the United States and US courts will actually abide by this, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Of course, there are exceptions to this, and some of the most serious offenses, especially at the international stage, whether it's things like torture or crimes against humanity or things like that, you could be a head of state and still there wouldn't be any immunity for crimes like that. But in this particular case, whether it's arms or narcotics related, there isn't an exception to this. Maduro still maintains and has this protection under international law. So that again is another violation that's taking place there. The real issue here is the United States extending its own sovereignty or its own jurisdiction or its own ability against another state, and that is where the problem lies. Because what this essentially is symbolic of, or is a symptom of, is the lack of sanctity that international law is being afforded, especially over the past 2 or 3 years. And really, a lot of this can come from Donald Trump coming into power, but also what's been happening with, say, Russia and Ukraine, but especially in Gaza. So Israeli forces and the disregard they've had for the laws of war, the laws of armed conflict, international humanitarian law, and other precepts, basic tenets, the law of the prohibition against genocide, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, all of those things have been violated time and time again, to such an extent that really the value of international law has fallen in that particular incident, but also it has a knock-on effect in other areas. What is also problematic is that, when Russia does something, it might not have the same impact as when a Western democracy, for example, violates international law. So Russian violations, as terrible as they are, do not undercut the foundation of international law, because Russia wasn't really the guarantor of international law. International law, especially after the Second World War, this rules-based order, the architects of this were Western European countries, the United States, and really Western democracies. So when they lose faith, when they start violating this system that they have propped up and that they have been the biggest proponents of, and especially the United States, that's when it becomes highly problematic, because the guarantors are now stepping out, right? They've lost faith in their own system. So anyone else, people who have been accused of violating international law, they're saying, look, you guys violate it all the time, why should we follow it right now? So this becomes really the problem. The sanctity of international law is breaking down, and we need to take certain steps to reinsure that sanctity comes back. And it's not going to be easy, right? It's going to be highly problematic. Now, there are two things that could happen. One is that this international rules-based order collapses, and that you have a return to bloc politics and Cold War style issues and Cold War really on steroids. Or what you can have is that another state that is willing to be a guarantor, or group of states even, step up and replace the role that the US has abdicated. And China seems to be the number one contender here. It has that ability, that financial ability, but also that clout, really, if you will. And China has, on the whole, been somewhat better at adhering to some of the major aspects of international law. Of course, there are a huge number of human rights issues that arise, but it hasn't been going around and invading countries left, right, and center as other countries have been. So I think there might be a mix of some European and Chinese, leadership that comes and emerges from this withdrawal of the U.S. from the international stage, and that might lead to a different flavor of international law that develops going forward. Because when you take on this role as leader, you're able to shape it, and I think a lot of international law will now be shaped by China in its own image, and so you're going to have a different world there.